Imagine your home is burning. Flames tear through the wooden beams. Smoke chokes the narrow stairwell. Everything you own, your savings, your tools, your memories, is about to vanish. Then a wealthy man arrives. He doesn't bring water, he brings paperwork. He tells you he'll stop the fire, but only if you sell him the property first. Right now, at a fraction of its value. Sign or watch it burn. This wasn't a modern corporate buyout during the 2008 crash, and it's not a prediction for the 2026 reset. It was ancient Rome. But the math is identical. And the man standing calmly in front of the flames was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in the Roman Republic. But here's the real mystery. How did Rome, the most powerful city in the Mediterranean, allow emergency services to become a private profit engine? Why were fires so constant that they became investment opportunities? And how did one man turn disaster into a real estate empire? Tonight, we uncover the Roman real estate crisis and the fire brigade that built a fortune. By the 1st century BCE, Rome was no longer a modest republic. It was an expanding imperial power pulling wealth from Spain, North Africa, Greece, and the Near East. The population exploded. Conservative estimates placed the city at 500,000 people. Some suggest nearly 1 million. For the ancient world, this was staggering. But the city wasn't built for that scale. Rome expanded upward, not outward. Most residents lived in insulae, crowded apartment blocks rising several stories high. These buildings were constructed quickly and cheaply. Wooden beams, shared walls, narrow staircases, minimal ventilation, no standardized fire safety. They were stacked tightly along winding streets barely wide enough for carts. And in a world without electricity, heating systems, or gas lines, fire was everywhere. Oil lamps, cooking flames, forges, bakeries. All it took was one spark. Rome did not have a modern welfare state. There were no public housing inspectors, no municipal fire departments, no standardized building regulations enforced across the city. Instead, powerful elites owned vast portfolios of rental properties. Most Romans rented. Very few owned property. Tenant protections were minimal. If your building collapsed or burned, you had no safety net. Insurance, at least in any structured sense, did not exist. If your building burned, you lost everything. And if you didn't have reserves of cash, you were forced to sell. This is where the story shifts from tragedy to strategy. Crassus's path to immense wealth began during chaos. In the civil wars led by Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Rome experienced proscriptions, official kill lists. Those labeled enemies of the state were executed, and their property was confiscated and auctioned at deep discounts. Most Romans saw terror. Crassus saw inventory. He bought estates, homes, and commercial buildings for fractions of their worth. But confiscated property was just the beginning. He realized something more predictable than politics. Rome was built to burn. Crassus organized a private force of roughly 500 men. On the surface, they were firefighters. In practice, they were negotiators backed by buckets. When a building caught fire, his brigade would rush to the scene. But they didn't immediately extinguish the flames. Crassus would approach the owner. He offered to buy the property, immediately, at a steep discount. If the owner refused, the brigade stood still. As the fire spread, desperation increased. Eventually, many owners signed. Once the deal was complete, Crassus's men would extinguish what they could and salvage what remained. He would then rebuild using skilled slaves he owned, architects, craftsmen, construction crews, and rent the property for profit. He repeated this process over and over. Each fire became an acquisition opportunity. Each crisis transferred property from vulnerable individuals to a man with liquidity. Rapid urban growth led to overcrowded housing. Insulae teemed with families, shops, and chaos, a city bursting at the seams. Cheap construction made fires frequent and devastating, threatening life and property at every turn. With no public emergency services, private intervention became the only option, a void someone could exploit. Without insurance, a single fire could wipe out a family's wealth overnight. Desperation forced owners to sell at steep discounts, prime opportunity for the cash-rich elite. Crassus didn't start the fires. He created leverage, consolidating properties, investing in silver mines in Spain, and employing thousands of skilled slaves to generate revenue. Crassus wasn't just a landlord. He became a liquidity provider in a city that lacked it. In times of panic, liquidity dictated power. If you can already see the parallels between Rome's housing trap and what's happening in our own time, then you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe. Because we don't just retell history. We dissect it. We follow the incentives. We expose the systems behind the power. These deep economic breakdowns take serious research, and your support allows us to keep uncovering the financial mechanics that shaped entire civilizations. And stay with me, because this is where the story turns darker. For Crassus, wealth wasn't enough. He wanted something far more dangerous. Despite his fortune, Crassus lacked something critical in Roman society: military glory. His contemporaries included towering figures like Julius Caesar and Pompey. Together, they formed what historians call the First Triumvirate, an informal alliance that dominated Roman politics. Crassus financed Caesar's early political career. He backed legislation that benefited business elites. He used his wealth to influence elections. But prestige in Rome did not come from rental income. It came from conquest. In 53 BCE, Crassus launched a campaign against Parthia, seeking military triumph to rival Pompey's eastern victories. The campaign ended in catastrophe at the Battle of Carrhae. Crassus was killed. Legend claims molten gold was poured down his throat, a symbolic punishment for greed. Whether literal or exaggerated, the symbolism stuck. But his death did not solve Rome's housing instability. The structural weaknesses remained. Decades later, under Nero, the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE destroyed vast portions of the city. Entire districts were reduced to ash. This time, the scale forced systemic reform: wider streets, height restrictions on buildings, stronger materials like brick and stone, organized public firefighting units. Earlier, Augustus had established the Vigils, a publicly funded fire brigade, recognizing that emergency response could not remain a private bargaining chip. Rome learned, slowly, that essential services tied to survival cannot depend solely on profit incentives. But that lesson came after immense destruction. The ancient world feels distant, but the economic logic is familiar. When housing markets collapse, who buys? In 2008, we saw the Crassus Method return when institutional giants bought thousands of foreclosed homes for pennies. But history shows that was just a rehearsal. As we approach the 2026 debt wall, the fire isn't physical, it's financial. When the next liquidity crisis hits, the modern-day Crassus won't be standing there with buckets of water. He'll be standing there with a digital contract, waiting for you to be desperate enough to sell your future for a moment of safety. The pattern: crisis reduces asset values. Small owners lack reserves. Capital-rich entities step in. Ownership concentrates. Crassus would recognize the model instantly. He understood something timeless. When fear peaks, prices fall. When prices fall, those with liquidity expand. The mechanism has not changed in 2,000 years. Modern behavioral economics confirms what Crassus intuitively exploited. Under extreme stress, humans prioritize immediate survival over long-term value. We discount the future heavily when facing present danger. A burning building collapses time horizons. The owner is no longer thinking about rental yields over 10 years. They are thinking about stopping flames now. Crassus monetized that shift in perception. He didn't need to threaten. Fire did that for him. Why didn't Rome establish public firefighting sooner? Because many elites benefited from the chaos. Stricter building codes reduce profit margins. Public services require taxation. Collective solutions threaten private advantage. Political systems often tolerate inefficiency until catastrophe makes reform unavoidable. This pattern appears across history. Financial regulations follow crashes. Safety laws follow disasters. Public health reforms follow epidemics. Reform is reactive, and in the space between risk and reform, fortunes are made. 3 clear takeaways. 1. Rapid growth. Without infrastructure, creates fragility. Rome expanded economically faster than it built protective systems. The result was systemic vulnerability. 2. Liquidity is the only real shield. Crassus's true power wasn't his army, it was his cash. In a debt-based system, the person with the most liquidity during a crash becomes the new king. This is why the 2026 reset is so dangerous for the middle class. 3. When public necessities become private leverage, incentives distort. If profit depends on disaster, disaster becomes tolerable, even useful, to those positioned to benefit. Rome believed it was eternal, yet within decades of Crassus's death, the Republic dissolved into autocracy. Wealth concentration, political instability, and elite competition intensified. Economic systems rarely collapse overnight. They erode. Watch for the signs. Overheated housing markets, infrastructure lagging behind growth, essential services privatized under stress, crisis-driven consolidation. The fire brigade model never truly disappears. It evolves. If this deep dive changed how you think about ancient Rome, or about modern real estate, make sure you subscribe and share this video with someone who follows economic history or housing trends. Comment below. Do you think Crassus was simply a product of his system? Or did he shape it? History isn't just about emperors and battles. Sometimes it's about contracts signed in smoke-filled streets. And sometimes the real power in an empire isn't the man with the sword. It's the man holding the pen while everything burns.